Welcome to a Leader's Journey podcast. I'm your host, Joel Gunn.
I've got a new friend named Monty on the show with me today. Monty, welcome.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it, Joel. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. My son heard you speak recently and he reached out, I think before the session was over, like, Dad, you got to get this guy on your podcast. So thank you to my son,
Well,
Nathan, for connecting us.
Yeah.
Just before the show.
Great guy.
Yeah. Yes. I kind of like him a lot.
I can see why.
So Monty, you've got a background in business. You're an MBA with UT, Baylor Bear. Been around Texas for a while, living up in Fort Worth. But just before the show, I was asking what lights you up, as a person. And the first thing that came to mind was your family and your faith. And we talked about that a little bit. And as we started to transition into the show here, we were talking about one phrase you said that caught my attention. As you said, you're fascinated by people. Unpack that a little bit. You started to share a story with me how when you were young, your parents were looking for you. Let's go there.
Oh yeah, we were traveling. We used to we would drive to Oklahoma 2 or 3 times a year. My dad's parents died before my mom even met him, and so we had family in Oklahoma. For some reason, we decided to live in Southeast Texas, and we would drive to Oklahoma. And we were at a McDonald's, and I was probably maybe 2.5, 3 years old, and they lost me for a while, and then they found me, but I was in a booth with another family that I'd gone over and set up and started talking with the family. So I think that kicked me off in my interest of people. It's amazing to me how interesting people are when you take time to get to know them. There's a young man that I try to get to know all the folks at Central Market or at HEB. And I like to shop in produce and be out amongst people. And there's a young man that it probably took me about 5 years to kind of get him to really talk with me. And he's a great guy. And now he's telling me about his niece, and he's asking about my grandkids. And I think people are really worth the time. And as a leader, I think people are really worth the time to explore and to listen to. And you have to use that prudently, obviously, when you're in business and you're trying to move things along. But I think when you're out and about, everybody's in haste and everybody's moving forward and fast. And I'm the same way. I move with a lot of energy and very quickly. But people have always fascinated with me and their stories and how they think and why they are the way they are. And anyway, I'll stop there. That's kind of gets me fired up about people.
Well, you made an important observation there. Leaders so often get caught up in the hustle and bustle, right? The race of the day, the race of the week. We've got cadence of the year, Q1, Q2, end of year, so on. And we forget about the people around us. And we can't just stop and have conversations all day, every day, because we won't get anything done. But those strategic conversations that let people know that we actually care about them as humans, they do matter.
Mm-hmm.
And so...
Yeah, they do.
It's easy to get focused on task and forget the people, especially depending on your leadership style.
Well, sure, and you can have a hard driving environment with high demands and high expectations and high demands for EBITDA growth and all the kind of things that you would want from a growing, fast-paced business. But you can also create a dynamic team environment. You can create a place where, and I've done a lot of work in with values in the spaces I've been in. I even created a program called Valuability, which is a recognition of values plus ability put together. And it was something we did and it was successful, and we created a whole recognition program. But even in that, you can put values on the wall. You can have the list, you can have the definitions, you can have the examples. But there's something about paying attention to a person and as we were talking about earlier, inviting them into a story. And we as believers have obviously the greatest story we can invite someone into. But even in the workplace, you can invite them in the story, but you can't invite them to the story if you're not clear, and if you don't take the time to get clarity. So the having the values and all that, I think, are important because they create a general atmosphere of how things may go or you want them to go. But I think there's a lot of opportunity for leaders, particularly leaders who are walk in faith and walk in a relationship with the Lord, to maximize insights from the Holy Spirit and from the Word of God to pay attention to what's beyond just the atmosphere. And that that is where I think in the workplace, it's important. The work story as well as the overall story are important to invite people into. And
Mm.
it's not that you have to necessarily be an evangelist in the workplace. Your behavior, we all know you your language, your work, your behavior, all those things are factors of what people observe. But taking time to observe a person and ask them a simple question or ask them if they need help or something is a wonderful opportunity to really bolster someone, particularly folks in the front line. I remember we were on property and at the resort, the company I was working with, we owned, and they took us way off the edge of property to the laundry facility. And I'd never been in a commercial laundry facility before of that order, and they had these giant machines that you could feed sheets into, and it'd fold them up, and feed the towels into them. I just had a blast, and it seemed, and I got the team, and we were all having a really good time. And I got a feedback months after that how meaningful it was that it took time to participate with them in their work, and I learned something from that. We all want that. We all have a desire for that. But I think there's particularly for opportunities, particularly in this environment as leaders, because there's a lot of confusion and so much opportunity with technology to isolate. And I think it's really important for leaders to invite people into the story.
Yeah, you made the comment as we were getting to know each other. Humans are the boss. Technology is the muscle. What's your concerns there, and what's your thoughts around that?
Well, I got my undergrad in journalism and English, so there's a lot of wordsmithing in my background, and so words have meaning to me. Well, they do, right? But they're also used kind of ubiquitously. And what's happening in my observation is, we all started seeing AI come onto the scene, 22, 23, all that, if you were paying attention. And what's happening is an ever increasing handoff, if you will, from humans to computational activity to describe that activity in human terms, like learning and hallucinating and all that. I just think that humans need to understand that they are the boss. We were put on this planet by the hand of God to be the boss, to take dominion, to steward. That's my observation, my understanding, and my faith and my drive. And I think to readily give up the unique and profound attributes of a human being in language and expectation to computational activity is challenging and could be risky.
Mhm.
And that's why for me, it's humans are the boss and technology is the muscle, because the technology can be very valuable. I mean, you can get some productivity gains with AI. You can get, as we've seen, on and on and on with the advent of technology. This one's particularly interesting because of the challenge of, and I'm not harnessing all the doom and gloom. I just think it particularly odd that you look at the attributes of a human and it's being readily given to what I call activated information. That's why I call AI is activated information, because it's activated by humans and it's information. And there's nothing artificial about it. It's real. People are using it all the time. There's hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars going into it. It's real. And but is it intelligent? I don't know. It's activated information. If you go back and look at some founders of that whole space, one of them was Claude Shannon. He was with Bell Labs, and I think he was born in late 1800s, maybe in 1903. I can't remember. He was with Bell Labs, and he was part of that team. Some people have called him the father of cryptography, and some people have called him the father of information. He wrote a couple of papers on the theory of information and cryptography, and he did some early work with some mechanical devices that with a program would map out the computational activities where that mechanical device then would go in places that it knew because it already calculated the paces or whatever. And then they would change the maze and get some more information. So to me, it's activated information. Yes, it's there. There's nothing artificial about it. To me, it's real. How do you use it? How are we wise about it? I'm just saying humans are the boss and tech is the muscle. We just need to be smart.
And one of the things that I understood from not only my son that heard your talk recently, but somebody else that was in the audience, what you talked about how we're at this, in my words, not yours, how we're at this junction or this fragile point in society where more and more people are disengaging from their work. right? Those we see, the stats coming out globally, 1.7 billion people are disengaged or whatever the numbers are, right? It's just huge, astronomical numbers. And you're talking about technology it's a disruptive technology, right? So tend to anthropomorphize, when we see cartoons making animals talk, and now we've got computers that are emulating enough of a human conversation that we're starting to think of it, as an it or as a person and less of an it as we interact with AI. But at the same time, society went through a worldwide pandemic. We've been isolated, for that season. There's people that are not wanting to return to office. People are wanting to return to office. It's just the whole world's in a bit of a chaos as they're trying to figure out what matters, right? And where do they belong? How do we get them as leaders? How do we get our people more engaged and feeling part of the story? You've built a model around that, as I understand it. And since I missed your talk, I'd actually like to hear a little bit about that.
Sure. For a long time, I had a small design brand company with a business partner, and we helped leaders and CEOs and businesses and all scale and all kinds of industries get clarity on who they were, their identity, and how they wanted to march forward. So we got pretty good at that. And then I was asked to join a hospital and become the chief brand officer. And I also was given the entire enterprise patient experience. We were doing several things for that. Is actually the hospital in Fredericksburg, Texas, Hill Country Memorial Hospital. And Mike Williams was the CEO, and he'd been a client. He's been a friend, longtime friend, and was a client of ours. And he took over the role and asked me to join. That's how I ended up in the hospital space. We were activating so many different change elements. 82% of our workforce were clinically trained. The community loved the hospital. The board said we're going to remain an independently owned community hospital at all times. Chris Avery, James Avery's son from James Avery Jewelry, was the outgoing board president at the time I joined. So there was a lot of intentional activity around this hospital and very determined group to move forward. I had designed and put in place a brand platform called Remarkable Healthcare. And I separated the word health and care specifically so we could move forward and focus on health as much as care. And so Greg and I presented it to the board the year before we joined. The board adopted it. We moved forward. I got on board. And we brought in Ann Rhodes, the chief people officer for our values. We brought in Brian Williams, who's a global trainer for Ritz-Carlton, who's now a speaker. We brought in Toyota Lean process improvement. I mean, we had that little hospital going a lot of different directions. But I kept hearing the ubiquitous term buy-in. Oh, they're bought in, they're bought in, they're bought in. But I could tell there was great resistance. And because when we came on board, that first year for me personally was actually a little discouraging because it seemed like there were 15 different definitions internally with the team of what remarkable meant. So it was like, oh, we're already remarkable, or we can't be remarkable, or that's stupid. We'll never be remarkable. And it's just all this tension. So you had the workforce of the team being introduced something very clear and different, that the expectations now were somewhat defined, and then we were getting them more defined about what that meant. But you had all of the processing that each person has to go through and change. It's a little question mark, it's a big question mark, or you're running down the hallway with your hair on fire because you're freaking out. So I started with this thing called the path of what if that moved one. I would do these forums with Mike, and we talked about change, and one side of the path of what if is, oh no, what if that happens to me? It becomes fear. You hunker down. It's all about me. It's hard to be productive. You're resistant. There's friction. On the other side is like, oh, what if we could? And so we talked about how we could move fear to hope. So you could go down the path of fear. You could go down the path of hope. And the hope was centered around teamwork. And what if we could? What if we could do this? What if we could do that? What if we could make these changes? In all of that, though, I started seeing data, however your audience wants to talk about it, from Gallup saying that 62 or 65% of the workforce in aggregate across industry was not engaged. But everybody keeps saying, oh, they're bought in, they're bought in, they're bought in. But then I started thinking about, well, there's people out there that are pulling in the parking lot, coming in here. I'm watching them. They're not bought in. They're not bought in. So I put bought in and drew a box around it, a square around on a whiteboard in the office, and really went to work on what does buy-in mean. And as I did that, it showed me a progressive map of 4 activities, behaviors, if you will, in every organization, in my observation. and they are bought in, and then there's people that need to go out. So there's Jack Welch used to fire 10% of his workforce regularly. I wouldn't necessarily advocate that, but that's what happened. So there was always an out. Then there was the ideal state. What's the ideal state? And that's all in, right? We talk about it. There's all in podcasts. There's all in here. There's all in everywhere. But it was just, what is this activity? And every one of those categories has a story. Your bought in folks say, just tell me what to do. I'll get it done. I'm here. I'm committed. I'll get it done. Your all in folks say, give me more, give me more, give me more, give me more, give me more. Your out folks say, I ain't doing that. But there was this territory of behavior that didn't make sense to me. And I thought, okay, what is that? And as I observed and we made changes and we talked, it dawned on me one day. Those folks are just in. Each one of those is hyphenated. And I've given the talk on the end frame. It's called the end frame. And I designed it and been using it in different industries. And it's been more strategic for leaders at this point. We're looking at building it out more. And what I've noticed is when I put just in on the board, I've heard gasps in the audience. And I think because it gives people a language set, I've tagged it specifically with conversational language that everybody observes by their own behavior and by their behavior of their teammate and work. I have, as I told the audience at C12, I have been in every category. I've been out, I've been just in, I've been bought in, I've been all in. But I tell leaders, you're looking for behavioral patterns. And then there's each story is being told by the behavior. Remember, bought in is just tell me what to do, I'll get it done. I'm the workhorse, that's me. All in, I just give me more, give me more. Your outs are saying I ain't doing it, but your just-ins are saying, well, maybe, kind of, probably not. I don't know, whatever. Yeah, but don't do it. And you know who I'm talking about. And when that happens, there are ways for leaders to address each category. And if you understand what the behavior is and the categories you're after, then you're really, really wanting to do is combine your bought-in behavior with your just-in behavior. So your bought-in with your just-in gives you the platform for all-in teamwork and all-in culture, because you dovetail those two together. You dovetail the I'm going to get it done with the let's do more. And boy, I tell you, if you feed that and continue to give clarity and insight and resources to that, what will happen is you'll begin to see the territory of your all-in teamwork and your culture expand. On the front end, it'll begin to find new areas for success. And on the back end, it'll put the pressure on your just-ins. Because what happens if leaders do not address the just-in, and if you look at the data, what you were saying, the Gallup data says, now it's 80-something% of people are not engaged in worldwide level. The U.S. is a little less than that. But if you look at that on a weighted scale, your just-in category is nearly three-quarters of your whole entire environment. And what I tell leaders is you have to go after that behavior immediately. And there's three things that happen in that in my observation, there's probably more. There's psychologists and psychiatrists that could go deep down dive in all this, but I'm seeing it as it is. When you have a just-in behavior that you need to address, you have to go at it quickly as a leader. And there's three things that we've seen. One is it's an attitude problem. If it's an attitude problem and they're just at their core resistant and don't need to be there, you can move them to the out category. The other thing is it could be a life event. They've got something going on, a spouse is ill, there's financial trouble, they've got a child that's something's going on, life event that just has them stuck in a just-in behavior. And that's where you as a leader have the opportunity to be thoughtful and compassionate and figure out a way to bolster them and discover. And then over time, you can see where that goes. The third thing is information and communication. But that's where it bifurcates, because as a leader, you should say, well, if you don't have enough information, what else do you need to know? Because your goal is to move them in the bottom. Your goal is to move them in the atmosphere of an all-in teamwork, because you want to get rid of the just-in behavior in your culture. But it's also their responsibility to say, hey, I don't have enough information. So it bifurcates. Do you have what you need? No, I don't have what I need. But none of that happens, in my observation, if the leader isn't courageous and creating a culture of courage where a person can say, hey, I don't have enough information. I'm kind of stuck. Can I get more? Can I learn more? Whatever. And the leader's saying, you know what? Do you have everything you need? Because I haven't been paying attention, and because I believe leaders and their behavior can move their teams to just in and out. And if you allow a just in culture to permeate, your bought in folks are going to get more diluted. They're going to look around and say, I'm only going to do 93% this week. And you're all in folks. I'm out of here. This is a crazy place. I can't be successful here. And then I call it the mire of mediocrity and the kingdom of meh, or the land of meh. And you can build kingdoms in the land of meh, house upon house, territory upon territory. That's why I think it's very important for leaders to get clear with what they're after and be courageous to address it. And then the in-frame workshops takes people through how to do that and get it done.
Monty, is there a distribution? I think you mentioned the percentage earlier, but is this like a bell curve distribution of in these four categories? Is it slanted? Like where do people land based on what you've seen?
Well, and I'm using multi-point data from Gallup and some others on what they're seeing. So if you look at it, I have it in four separate squares. They're equally identified as a behavior category, but they're not equally weighted. And so if you expanded your just in almost 2/3 of or really close to 4/5 of the entire rectangular block, that's really what the weighted value is. So the bell curve would heavily be in that category of the just in, which would be a skew from middle, right? From the mean. So, or median mean.
And your all-ins, have you seen what percentage of your population do they tend to be?
They tend to be,
We're talking single digits?
maybe, probably 5 to 7 is what I've seen. However, and those that the all-in leaders that I've seen, Craig Hicks is a general manager of Black Horse Golf Club outside of Houston, Northwest Houston, and close to Cypress, and fantastic leader. And he leads with the in-frame day in, day out. And he said, the first time he saw this, when I had given the talk and we did some workshops with his team, he said, I know what's wrong with that guy. He said, he's been just in, and I know exactly what I need to do. I mean, there was it's easy because it's conversational, Joel. It's how people think, and you get it, right? If I say he's getting engaged, not engaged, and I'm not being critical of Gallup, they're tremendously insightful in what they are able to do. But for me, it had to just be, how does this work in our minds? How does this work in our thinking? How does this work in our conversations? And what it's done is it's collapsed that engagement survey timeline. If you put it out there and you have to wait for the data and all that, come back, and then things have probably changed and that person may not be there anymore, to, hey, are you bought in? Hey, are you all in? Hey, are you just in? What I've seen, though, is different industries and audiences look at things way differently. In the higher education space, they would use the word toxic for all in because it made them nervous. Whereas in a business space, just in and out are toxic. We got to keep going. It's fascinating. I keep using that word, but it is. But generally speaking, as I do these workshops, chunks of agreement, if you will, kind of align for each category. But here's where I think it really, really gets things going. When you do a workshop, you're having your team participate, and as that takes them through each category, it's basically an aggressive distillation process to create a narrative for people to understand using their own language of their own organization. It's not my language. It's not book language. It is their language. And that's where it really gels. So I could do 4 different organizations over 4 different days, and they will have similarities in all in, similarities in bought in, similarities in just in, similarities in out, but they're not going to be the same because it's how they think, it's how they observe, it's the language that they put forward, and it's how they're describing it in their own mind and with each other. And that's where I think that it really seems to help leaders get real clarity on encouraged to move forward and have those conversations and make decisions.
You've before the show and even now, you've used the word courage and clarity a few times. How do leaders walk that out? This is kind of, as we start to bring this episode to a close. How do leaders practice clarity and courage? And what have you seen works best?
Well, you and I were talking about what was the quote you said about simple?
Simplicity
Simplicity is
is genius.
genius. Is that what yeah. Um, getting simplicity to the genius level is very difficult work. I tell leaders some of the hardest work you'll do is getting something simple. But once you do, then it's the stage for amplification. And you can really go to town. But oftentimes people get about 80% there, and it's kind of good enough because there's that last 20% that's real gritty because you have to work out some things with your leaders and if it's an owner, then I was in one environment one time and the owner stood up in a room of 100 people and has a big cigar and he said, I own this company. We're keeping that name. And he got up and left. And so, and that's their prerogative. And I liked it. It was very direct and clear, but and it was simple. This is what we're doing. So that simplicity is super important to bring forth clarity. Because when you have clarity, you can always map back your questions, your insights, your coaching, your accountability issues, your business performance. You can map it back. Is this getting us here? Is this what we are after? And, a lot of times people go spend enormous amount of time and energy, which is effective for strategic planning and getting things down. But oftentimes those meetings, that list grows and grows and grows and grows. And what happens in that, if the list grows and grows and grows, your next level of folks who have to implement that strain, if you will, and get, what are we doing versus, hey, these are the 3 things we're going to accomplish. We got 3 things. Here's what we're going to do. So that's the clarity. And in the piece with the end frame, getting clarity on the expectation, because once you get the information, once you get clarity on what the behavior is for your organization, then you can use it upstream and downstream. You can start changing your recruiting process to use the language of the house that says we are now bought in, all in together. We're an all in team. These are the words. This is the language we use. So why don't you come join this team? And it's a pre-filter, right? It's a pre-filter for recruiting, but then it also gives you the opportunity on the coaching. It gives you real-time coaching environment, because if you see a stuck behavior, you know exactly what it is because it's clearly defined, and you can bolster and strengthen and keep things moving along at a pace. So that's the courage. I mean, the clarity piece. The courage really has to be, I think courage is a practice, and it's sometimes difficult to take that first step that, hey, we are going to hang our hat on this clarity thing, and there will be resistance. There will be resistance. And that's where I think that you have, as a leader, have to be not bogged down by the resistance, but courageous enough to address it and keep things going and use it to the advantage for the person, but also the advantage of the endeavor.
That's good. Monty, as we wrap up the episode, any final thoughts?
Joel, I really just, thank you so much for giving me a little bit of time to talk about this. I appreciate you and what you're doing. The closing thought I would have is God has created us unique. He breathes life into us, and we just need to pay attention to that.
That's good. Monty, it's been a pleasure to meet you virtually and have you on the show. Look forward to maybe staying in touch and having you back on the show at some point in the future.
And people can connect with me through LinkedIn right now. That's the easiest way to do it.
Let's stay in touch.
It's been a treat. Yeah, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Bye-bye.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of A Leader's Journey podcast. If you enjoyed it, give us a thumbs up and remember to subscribe to our channel.